Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. So today is a big day for the Mark IV and its intake manifold build, as we are actually going to build the Plenum. So I pulled everything that I built in the last intake manifold video off of the fixture and mocked it up on the side of the engine. So that is the head flange, the runners, velocity stacks, and the Plenum floor plate. And my tubing has arrived to make the Plenum, and that's, like I said, what we're going to do today. So the tubing is a pretty interesting piece, or they are pretty interesting pieces, I should say. And one of them is right here. So these are all from Race Part Solutions, and I've done quite a bit of business with RPS in the past. They are a very good shop, a very good retailer for all types of fabrication materials, race car components, and different race car solutions, hence the name. So you can see that with their sticker, they've been around for 20 years. So a huge congratulations to my friend Darren, who owns RPS, and his whole crew on 20 years of being an awesome company, an awesome supplier of parts to myself and a wide variety of other people. But the tubing that I'm using is right here. So this is obviously a 90-degree bend. It's 4.5 inch diameter, and you can see that it has quite a bit of wall thickness to it. This is actually 11 gauge tubing. So anything like an intake manifold, an intercooler, things along those lines, the pressure vessels, for lack of a better term, I like to build out of thicker material for turbo cars, and especially turbo cars that are going to see a lot of boost like the Mark IV. The more wall thickness you have, the stronger the piece is going to be, and the less likely that you're going to have things balloon or potentially rupture welds, rupture pieces, so on and so forth. So this 11 gauge aluminum tubing is a great option for that, and the old intake manifold was actually built out of 5 inch 11 gauge tubing that you can see right here. So the design for the new one's going to change a little bit from this, but it'll still be kind of the same idea and the same concept, and you guys will see as we go along and build all of this. So to begin this Plenum construction, we first need to make our first initial cut, and that is going to be the rear section of the Plenum. So that will be this portion right here, and we're going to make a pretty aggressive off-tangent cut to make all of this fit, and we need to figure out exactly the depth and the height and everything else of it, as we do not have unlimited space to work with here. And even though I shortened the runners a little bit and moved everything inboard a little bit, we still have this distance right here that we have to contend with. So let me get a tape measure and take a measurement of that distance there, and that will give me kind of an idea of where I can make this initial cut at. Once I have that marked out, then it's simply a matter of taking our piece of tubing, or our bend rather, putting it in the bandsaw, letting the bandsaw do its thing, and then we can test fit and see what our distance is, make any alterations if need be to it. With our off-tangent cut made, the next thing I need to do is to mark out the high spot on this side as well as this side, as this whole lower section of this piece of tubing is going to be removed, and I'll just leave the outer shell. So the easiest way that I've found to do this is very rudimentary, but it works very well. And that is to just take the tube, place it on the ground, and scrub it around like that. By the time you're said and done doing this, And provided that you've applied equal pressure and everything else onto the tube, well, the only part that's going to contact the ground is the highest part of either side. Right there, you can see that I've roughed in that high side mark. So if we come over to this side, do the same thing, you can see that we've scrubbed in the mark on this side as well. So now I'll take a permanent marker and draw out the actual cut line, and then we'll be able to cut this lower section off of this piece of tubing and get everything squared away that way. The next thing that I need to do is to trim the plenum floor plate down to the size that it will end up being. So right now, it's a little bit longer than it actually needs to be. And what I'm going to do is to come in with this little metal ruler, and from the edge of the front and the rear velocity stacks, I'm going to mark out 7/8 of an inch. That is about the same dimension that a buddy of mine with a really nice 2JZ intake manifold, I asked him to measure that dimension for me, and that's about what he came up with. So I'm going to mimic that on this manifold build, as shrinking down that plenum floor plate a little bit will kind of help keep the package more consolidated and make everything fit in the engine bay a little bit better. So it's a pretty minimal trim, but I think it's going to have pretty large benefits to what I'm doing here. So double check, 7/8 there, and I just verified 7/8 on the back side. So now I can pop this floor plate off of the runners and the flange and the whole assembly, cut it down to size, and then from there I can take that shell that I just cut and mark out how the rear of the plenum floor plate needs to be cut and get that trim done and everything fit into place. Well, after a little bit of grinding and tweaking and adjusting here and there, the first section of the new plenum is tacked in place. So I tacked it in 3 locations, so it's nice and as rigid as it needs to be right now. And now I need to figure out the front piece that will locate the throttle body where it needs to be. Now I think the throttle body will reside somewhere kind of in this area right here. That will provide enough clearance for the throttle cam and the throttle cable bracket, and will also provide a well enough location that the TPS can connect to its portion of the harness right here. So this will end up being another shell cut essentially. that will come off of the front here, and it'll be this piece of tubing, something along those lines. I have to figure out exactly the angle that I need to make my cut along the run of this bend. But let me go ahead and set you guys on the tripod, figure out where this needs to be cut, do the cut, so on and so forth. And before too long, this will be squared away, the front section that is, and we can figure out the center linking piece between the rear portion of the plenum and the front portion of the plenum. The front bend for the plenum is now in place. I tacked it in 3 locations just like the rear, and this is what we are looking at right now. So, a couple of notes. I didn't do any trimming on the back side of it just yet, as I want to get the centerpiece coped and fit and everything else first before doing that cut on the back side. And if you look down the intake manifold, you can see that this kicks down just a hair, and that is by design. I also went ahead and I scribed the radius on the inside of this bend right here, so that way I can do my trimming on the front section, or the front side of the plenum floor plate, once the plenum is fabricated and I can pull it off. So at this point, I need to figure out what this centerpiece is going to look like. And the design of this manifold is a little bit different than the design of this one, just due to some material differences. So this old manifold, you can see that I don't have a seam until right here. And then I used a bend section here, a bend section here. I cut both of them halfway through, or halfway across their respective diameters, which equated to a 5-inch overall tubing diameter and some seams on the top and bottom side. The bottom side is pretty much a mirror of this top side. Now, with these bends that I have here, the leg lengths are quite a bit shorter, which would either necessitate putting a straight section in here, or what I'm going to do is hold one of these bends, or hold this final bend up, I should say, and roughly mark out where the cut needs to be to match up to the outside radius of this tube section right here. So rather than having the split or the seam running up right to the throttle body flange like it does on this manifold, the seam is going to be somewhere along here, and it'll be a cool shape, I think. I'm hoping at least. And this section of the tube right in through here will be what actually goes up to the throttle body flange. So there will not be a seam on the top and bottom sides that leads up to the throttle body flange. The seam will be back here. So hopefully that makes sense. And all that I need to do at this point in time is to mark out my cut on this final bend and then do the fabrication dance. Back and forth from the sanders over to here to get this, or whatever is left of this bend that I'm working with on here, fit in properly and looking right and all of that. fabrication waltz has been concluded, and what I'm left with I think looks pretty cool. So, all of the coping aside, this is what we have. And it looks quite a bit different than the old Manifold, but like I said, with the materials that I'm working with, my hand was kind of forced. So, I think that this design may actually be an improvement over the old one, although I don't have a great way to empirically test that. However, in looking at this, and granted, the backside of this tube will be removed, probably half of this tube will be removed, but that being said, with this bend kind of directing air right now exclusively to cylinder number 1, and once the portion of the tube is removed that needs to be removed towards number 2, I think that I should get a little bit more air to those 2 cylinders. So with that being said, I can trace out my cut lines and get this piece cut, and put everything back together. And I guess I can cut the plenum floor plate at the same time. But point being, I can get all of this work squared away, and then we will just be tasked with making the 2 filler panels as far as the big, heavy fabrication work is concerned with this manifold. Good news, the Mark IV's new Plenum still fits in the engine bay. And here is what it looks like in there. So I more than likely will have to alter my fasteners that hold this manifold to the head. The old Speed Factory studs that I have, the broached hex drive on the end of it right there, I believe those little nubs are a little bit too long to allow the manifold to sink down into its home. But I can either run bolts on the top side or potentially find shorter studs. But all in all, I'm really happy with the way that this is coming out. I think that the curvy shape of it looks really cool. And I'm not sure how well you guys will be able to see right now. Let's try it. You can see that there's still a clear path to all of the velocity stacks, all of the runners, and I think this is going to work out really, really nicely. So the next thing to do is some sheet metal work. I need to cut 2 panels to fill in these voids on the top and then the corresponding one on the bottom side. So not the end of the world. This is really quite an easy thing to do, especially now that I have my vertical bandsaw up and operational. But all that needs to be done is a little bit of drafting and then some simple cutting and forming, and then we can tack those pieces in place and get ready for the great welding extravaganza of this intake manifold. Well, after taking the evening to think about what I built yesterday with this intake manifold, we're going to change things up a little bit. And I'm sure that some of you guys were punching the air as you saw me put this together, but we are going to fix it. So this, what I'll call the crotch, or this dip right here, although it looks cool, it is pretty much the opposite of what you want with an intake manifold. So if we look at this right here, we do have a clear line of sight pretty much the entire way back to the number 6 velocity stack. However, from this perspective, you can see that we have a hump, and not a hump in the correct direction right here. So what happened is I was so laser focused on making this joint fit right here that I neglected to think if it was even going the correct direction. So not the end of the world. I can fix it pretty easily, I believe, with these pieces right here. So I'm initially going to try to use this piece as this is going the correct direction. And if I lay this on top of this like so, you can kind of get an idea of what it needs to and should look like. Now the only bad part is to make this sink up onto this bend as it needs to. You can see that we don't have enough length right here. So I will need to cut and weld a little extension piece on the back of it for when this sinks up the way that it needs to onto this bend to make up the difference from the end of this tube to the end of this one. So I'll more than likely sand that down and blend that seam in, as I really don't want more than one seam on this side of the plenum, but I think that will be the way that this needs to go. In addition to that, the clearance issue that I ran into, where I had to remove the top 4 intake manifold studs and was debating if I wanted to put bolts or something else along those lines in place. Well, we can fix that as well while I'm at this. And I can also put a nicer surface finish on all of this. This will be a benefit across the board. So rather than me running my mouth any longer, let me go ahead and cut this apart and we can start rectifying the mistakes that I made yesterday and make this thing shaped and fit the way that it should. Well, I entered hyperfocus mode to get this all reworked, so I didn't film a whole lot, but the most important part is the plenum is now shaped correctly, and I feel much better about it. So this is the new revised plenum shape, and this is much better, and frankly, I don't know what the hell I was thinking with the first iteration, but this one is much better. So you can see that this little portion of a bend actually goes the correct direction, and I had to weld 2 pieces together to make this. You might be able to see that little bit of a line right there. That is the ground down weld, and I welded that both inside and outside to put as much material down as possible, since I knew that I was going to be sanding it down. Looking through the front, or what I've been calling the throttle body snout, you can see a much clearer path all the way back to the number 6 velocity stack, and the number 1 velocity stack is also nice and clear and open. And we don't have kind of the big dumb hump up in this transitional area between this bend and the rest of the shells that make up the remainder of the plenum. So much, much better. It fits in the car now without having to screw around with bolts as opposed to the studs on the top side, so I can use the hardware that I already have. And I think it still looks really cool, and this will still net me a nice curvy, oddly shaped weld that I really liked with the initial plenum design, and I was able to include that in this one as well. So now that the plenum is constructed in a manner that I feel much better about, I can draft out these filler panels and get those squared away. So I'm going to use 3/16 sheet for those long filler panels, as these being such a long and broadly shaped piece, I want to have additional material thickness here, as anytime you have a long flat panel, that is where you are most likely to have something swell and balloon and potentially rupture. The easiest way to combat that is to add wall thickness if you can, or material thickness. And being that I went and I bought additional 3/16 sheet to do this, I do have thicker material at my disposal. So this ends up being a fairly easy thing to do. I'll pull the manifold off of the fixture, lay it down over some cardboard, and with a marker I can scribe out the shapes of both the top and the bottom panels, as they are not going to be symmetrical. But once I get that done, I can transfer that over to aluminum, get everything squared away and ready to weld, and then it will be a matter of popping the plenum with the filler panels off of the fixture and off of the floor plate and doing all of the welding. All right, the time is finally here to weld the plenum together. So both of the filler panels are made. This is the top side, and I have a little bit of a gap right there, but that should be able to be filled no problem. The bottom side, right here, fits very nicely. Nice seam, everything is prepped, everything is ready to go. So without further ado, let's go ahead, strike an arc, and let's see if I can make this thing look halfway decent, and most importantly, make it look better than the old manifold. Another welding session in the books, and the Mark IV's new plenum is all one piece. So this didn't come out too badly. The welds are okay. Not the best that I've ever done, but certainly not the worst. And it's welded on the outside, as you can see. Also on the inside. And similar to an intercooler, I like to weld my intake manifolds on the inside and the outside whenever possible, just to make it that much stronger and more resilient. So this thing is minus trimming the filler panels down a little bit. As you can see, I ran them a little bit long, and that was on purpose, so that way I wasn't dealing with starting and stopping right on these corners. If you leave a little bit of extra material there, it makes those portions of the welds that much easier to do. And you can also wrap the welds around each of these sides, so that way it truly is welded the whole way inside and out, as opposed to there being a gap between the welds on these corners. But all of that being said, this thing is a throttle body flange away from being ready to go on the plenum floor plate. However, the other portions of the intake manifold, the runners and the plenum floor plate, they need a little bit of work before they are ready to accept the plenum. Now the other portions of the intake manifold, namely the runners and the plenum floor plate, need a little bit of additional work before they are ready to accept the plenum. I'm not going to get into that right now, as I'm at the end of the day here currently, but tomorrow I can go ahead and do the other modifications and additions that I need to do to those pieces, and very, very soon, maybe even tomorrow, we can marry the plenum to the floor plate, to the runners, to the head flange, and have the intake manifold most of the way completed for all intents and purposes. Well, with the Mark IV's new plenum all welded together, I think that is a good place to leave off for this video. So in the next episode, we will take this plenum, we will take the, need some light in here, but we'll take the runners, the plenum floor plate, the head flange, all of the different components that are involved with at least the base of the intake manifold. We'll put them all together and get everything wrapped up and ready for the last few accessories. Those are still on the way at this point in time, but they'll be here in the very near future, and at that point in time we can get them installed onto the manifold and get the manifold put back on the car and get ready to build the new intercooler tube. So the one thing that I did not have an opportunity to put on in this episode that I showed in the intro montage are these guys right here. So these are 1/16 NPT bungs, and they are going to be used for the nitrous nozzles, which we'll get into that in the next episode. Why are there 6 of them? Where do they need to go? How do they need to fit? Etc., etc. But with that being said, and before I run my mouth forever, let's go ahead and wrap this one up. So thank you guys, as always, for coming along on all of these different journeys and all of these different adventures with me. We are rapidly drawing to a close on the intake manifold build for this car. Hope that you guys have enjoyed the progress and process up to this point, and there's still more to come. I can't wait to get this done so I can get this car up and running again, as I have a few things I really want to play around with on it, and most importantly, now that warmer weather is coming, we can get the car back on the dyno, get it retuned on the Haltech, and get ready to go out and make some passes in the very, very near future. In addition to that, the SC is more or less wrapped up. We need a set of tires for it and a brake job, and then we can go out and start playing around and doing some tuning on it. And once the Mark IV is wrapped up, then it is time for the Aristo, which I'm really, really excited about, and I can't wait to dive into that project. But all of those things are upcoming in the future. Right now we're done with this one, and that's about it for right now. So as always, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, check out the website for manifolds, for merch, for all things good that way, including my MCB collection. I have a number of different apparel items and accessories all available in a really cool multicam black colorway, and I'm actually wearing one of the multicam black beanies right now. So all of those things are linked in the description below. Feel free to check them out, and if any of the items in the MCB collection speak to you, feel free to pick them up. And if not, well then hopefully I offer something in the future that does speak to you and that you would like to add to your collection. But with all of that being said, that'll be the end of this one, and I will see you guys in the next episode.